Have you ever wondered what it would be like to unlock the very secrets of the universe? For centuries, some of the most brilliant minds in history believed they could do just that through a mysterious practice called alchemy. It was this hidden world of secret societies and coded messages, all focused on one single, incredible goal. Just think about it for a second. Turning worthless lead into pure, shining gold and living for hundreds of years? This wasn't just some fairy tale. This was the legendary promise of alchemy, a sacred art that wasn't just about perfecting metals, but about perfecting humanity itself. They called this ultimate goal the magnum opus, the great work. And at the very heart of this great work, the key to the whole shebang was one legendary substance, the lapis philosophorum. You and I know it better as the Philosopher's Stone. And believe me, this wasn't just some fancy rock. It was the ultimate prize, the key to unlocking power and wisdom beyond imagination. So, what was the big deal? What could this mysterious stone actually do that made people risk absolutely everything to find it? Well, let's dive into the incredible powers it was said to hold.
Okay, the powers people claimed this stone had were, well, they were basically godlike. First, you've got the most famous one, of course, transmutation, the power to turn cheap metals into pure gold. But it didn't stop there. It was said to create the elixir of life, which could cure any illness and grant you eternal youth. But maybe the most important power of all wasn't physical. It was the promise of profound wisdom, of total spiritual enlightenment.
Now, as you can imagine, with a prize this powerful, you don't just leave the instruction manual lying around for anyone to find. Nope. The knowledge of the great work was one of the most closely guarded secrets in all of history, protected by a very, very exclusive club. The guardians of this knowledge were known as the Adepts. That title meant one thing. They had actually done it. They had completed the great work and held the true secrets. They were the masters of the art, and they were the ones who got to decide who else was worthy of learning it. These adepts were legendary, almost mythical figures. They were part of a secret brotherhood that spoke in codes and symbols. The stories said they were immortal, kept alive by their own elixir. They'd supposedly appear and disappear across Europe, looking for someone worthy to teach. But get this, they didn't open a school. An adept would pass down the entire secret to just one single student, who they called their philosophical son. So why all the secrecy? This quote from an anonymous adept just nails it. They believed that this knowledge was like a flower. In the right hands, like a bee, you could make honey. But in the wrong hands, like a spider, you could only make poison. They were terrified that someone driven by greed would use the stone to bring chaos, not enlightenment. So to protect these secrets, their formulas were never written in plain language. They were full of weird symbols and confusing stories. But here's the really clever part. Nearly every single recipe had one crucial step, left out on purpose. It was a test. The thinking was, if you weren't wise enough to figure out the missing piece on your own, then you definitely weren't worthy of the knowledge in the first place. Okay, so where did all this secret knowledge even come from? For alchemists, the ultimate source, the holy grail of text, was a short, super cryptic document called the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. This thing was considered the master blueprint for the entire great work. The tablet kicks off with this line right here. Now, charam is basically their word for the universal, raw stuff of creation, the one thing that everything else is made of. So the idea is that this whole secret process is really one single unified operation, but we experience it in three different ways, on three different levels. Now this line, this is probably the most famous idea in all of alchemy. It's the whole philosophy in a nutshell, what people often call as above, so below. It simply means that whatever happens in the great big universe is perfectly mirrored in the small little things, and vice versa. And it is so important to get this. Superior and inferior here do not mean good and bad. Not at all. Think of it more like macro and micro. The giant cosmos of the heavens is reflected in the tiny world of the earth. And for the alchemist, this was crucial. It meant that transforming their own soul was directly connected to transforming metals in their lab. And that brings us to the actual work itself. Because of that as above, so below principle, the alchemist's quest was always a dual journey. It was a spiritual trial happening inside their soul, which was perfectly mirrored by a physical trial happening in the flasks and furnaces of their laboratory. So for the spiritual journey, groups like the Rosicrucians described it as climbing an invisible, magical mountain. This was all a metaphor, of course. First, a great wind comes and shatters all your old, false beliefs. Then an earthquake topples your ego. Then a fire burns away all your remaining impurities. Only after all that destruction does a deep calm settle in, and in that quiet new dawn, the treasure, true wisdom, is finally revealed.
And that inner journey had a direct physical parallel. For example, in one recipe, you'd start with simple dew and salt. You heat the mixture until it rots and turns pitch black, a stage called nigredo, which symbolized the death of your old self. Then, with gentle heat, the matter purifies and turns brilliant white, albedo, symbolizing rebirth. You would repeat this cycle of death and rebirth over and over until the substance was perfected. All right, so you've gone through these intense parallel trials of both soul and substance. What's the final payoff? What do you get at the end of the road? Let me tell you, it was something much, much bigger than a pile of gold. The final physical product of all this work was a substance called the tincture. This was essentially the philosopher's stone in its most potent, usable form, like a powder or a liquid. It was described as this beautiful, shining substance that had the incredible power to perfect anything it touched. And the power of this tincture was just mind-boggling. According to the Layton recipe, after all those cycles of purification, just one single part of the tincture could transform 100,000 parts of a metal like lead into the purest gold imaginable. Think about that ratio. But again, and this is the key, the gold wasn't the real prize. The true reward was what happened when the alchemist consumed the tincture himself. The texts say his mind would be completely opened. It was like the entire universe and all its secrets were suddenly downloaded into his brain. He would gain a true, direct understanding of God and creation. So, in the end, alchemy was always about this dual transformation. The physical change from lead to gold was just the outward proof, the mirror showing that you had achieved the real goal, the inner change of your own soul from a state of ignorance to one of total enlightened wisdom. One couldn't happen without the other. And that kind of leaves us with one big question, doesn't it? Do we look back on alchemy as just a failed, primitive attempt at chemistry before people knew any better? Or was the chemistry just an elaborate cover story, a beautiful, complex metaphor for a profound spiritual journey to transform the self? The true nature of the great work? Well, that just might be the alchemist's greatest secret of all.